Rosalyn Vance clutched her weathered valise as the stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Timber Creek's only hotel, dust billowing around the wooden structure like a shroud. It was 1878, and the mining town nestled in the Colorado Territory was to be her new home, whether she liked it or not. She had nowhere else to go after her father's passing, left her penniless and with a marriage contract she never agreed to. The driver called out, "Timber Creek, folks, end of the line." Rosalyn stepped down from the coach, her faded blue dress, once her mother's Sunday best, catching slightly on the metal step. She straightened her spine, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her as she made her way toward the hotel entrance. At 22, she was no stranger to hardship, but the prospect of marrying a man she'd never met made her stomach twist into knots. "That's her old man, Vance's daughter," someone muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Comin' to marry the banker. Would you look at that dress? Must be older than she is." A woman's voice added with a poorly concealed laugh. Rosalyn kept her gaze forward, her cheeks burning. The dress was indeed old, patched in places and faded from years of washing, but it was all she had. Her father's gambling debts had ensured there was nothing left for frivolities like new clothing. The arrangement with Bernard Holcomb, Timber Creek's only banker, and a man nearly 30 years her senior, had been her father's final desperate act. As she reached the hotel steps, a group of well-dressed women blocked her path. Their crisp, colorful dresses and elaborately pinned hair made Rosalyn feel even more out of place. "Well, well," the tallest woman said, eyeing Rosalyn's dress with undisguised contempt. "If it isn't Mr. Holcomb's mail-order bride. I must say, dear, I expected someone more suitable for a man of his standing." The women tittered behind gloved hands as Rosalyn stood frozen. "Mrs. Peterson," a deep voice called from behind her, "I believe you're blocking the entrance." The women's laughter died immediately. Rosalyn turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, dusty trousers, and a hat that had seen better days, the unmistakable attire of a working cowboy. "Mr. Pierce," Mrs. Peterson acknowledged stiffly. "We were just welcoming Miss Vance to town." "Is that what you call it?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. His gaze shifted to Rosalyn, taking in her travel-worn appearance and faded dress. Instead of the pity or disgust she expected, a smile touched his lips. "That shade of blue happens to be my favorite color." The simple statement, delivered without a hint of mockery, caused the women to exchange confused glances. Rosalyn felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "If you'll excuse us, ladies," he continued, stepping past them to hold the door open. "Miss Vance has had a long journey." Inside the hotel lobby, Rosalyn turned to thank her defender, but he waved it off. "Quinn Pierce," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Don't mind them. Small towns breed small minds sometimes." "Rosalyn Vance," she replied, offering her hand. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Pierce." His hand was calloused but gentle as he briefly shook hers. "Just Quinn? And that blue really does suit you, Miss Vance." Before she could respond, the hotel clerk called for her attention. When she looked back, Quinn Pierce was already heading out the door, his broad shoulders disappearing into the afternoon sunlight. The clerk provided her with a room key and information about her stay. "Mr. Holcomb has arranged for you to stay here until the wedding next week. He sends his regrets that he couldn't meet you today bank business in the next town over. He'll call on you tomorrow afternoon." Rosalyn nodded, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. The reality of her situation was inescapable. By this time next week, she would be Mrs. Bernard Holcomb, wife to a man she'd never met, bound by her father's desperate promise. As she followed the bellboy to her room, she couldn't help but think about the cowboy with the storm-gray eyes who thought her old blue dress was just fine. Quinn Pierce returned to his small ranch outside of town as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Colorado mountains. The modest spread wasn't much compared to some of the larger ranches in the territory, but it was his every acre paid for with years of hard work after the war. As he unsaddled his horse, his thoughts drifted back to the woman at the hotel, Rosalyn Vance. Her auburn hair had been pinned back severely, but a few tendrils had escaped to frame a face that showed both vulnerability and determination. Those amber eyes of hers had flashed with dignity, even as the town's so-called ladies had tried to humiliate her. Quinn had heard about Old Man Vance's daughter coming to marry Holcomb. The news had traveled through town faster than a prairie fire. Bernard Holcomb was not well liked, but he was respected for his money and influence. The man had buried 2 wives already, both having died under what some considered suspicious circumstances, though nothing was ever proven. "You're thinking too hard again," came a voice from the barn doorway. Quinn looked up to see his ranch hand and friend, Emmett Taylor, leaning against the frame. "Just wondering why a young woman would agree to marry a man like Holcomb," Quinn replied, hanging up his saddle. Emmett snorted. "Same reason most people do anything in this world, money or lack of it. Her pa died owing debts to half the gamblers between here and St. Louis." Quinn nodded, having heard the same. "Still, there's something about her." "Lord help us," Emmett sighed dramatically. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one that says you're about to stick your nose where it don't belong. Remember what happened last time?" Quinn did remember. His attempt to help a family being forced off their land had resulted in a bullet graze to his shoulder and a stern warning from the sheriff to mind his own business. But something about Rosalyn Vance's quiet dignity in the face of cruelty had stirred something in him he thought long buried. "Just being neighborly," Quinn said, patting his horse's neck. "Besides, that blue dress really was my favorite color." Emmett rolled his eyes. "Whatever you say, boss. Supper's ready when you are." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Rosalyn woke early, her body still accustomed to the rhythm of farm life. She dressed carefully in the same blue dress, the only one presentable enough for town, and made her way downstairs for breakfast. The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few early rising businessmen. Rosalyn took a seat near the window, grateful for the relative privacy. She was halfway through her meal when a shadow fell across her table. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up to find Quinn Pierce standing there, hat in hand. He was even more imposing in the morning light, tall and broad-shouldered, but there was a gentleness in his expression that put her at ease. "Please," she said, gesturing to the empty chair. Quinn sat down, placing his hat on the empty chair beside him. "Sleep well?" "As well as can be expected," she answered honestly. "It's strange being in a new place." "Timber Creek grows on you," he said, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Eventually?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "You don't sound entirely convinced. Let's just say it has its charms and its challenges." His gaze was direct, but not intrusive. "I understand congratulations are in order. Your engagement to Mr. Holcomb." Rosalyn's smile faded. "Yes. The wedding is scheduled for next Saturday." "Quick work. Mr. Holcomb is efficient." She took a sip of her tea to avoid saying more. Quinn studied her for a moment. "Forgive me for being forward, Miss Vance, but you don't strike me as a woman overjoyed about her upcoming nuptials." Rosalyn glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "Mr. Pierce." "Quinn," he corrected. "Quinn," she amended, her voice lowering. "I'm sure you understand that not all marriages begin with romance. Some are arrangements of convenience or necessity. And which is yours?" His bluntness surprised her, but there was no judgment in his tone, only concern. "Necessity," she admitted. "My father made certain promises before his passing." Quinn nodded slowly. "I see. It's really quite a common story," she continued, feeling strangely compelled to explain herself to this near stranger. "Father had debts. Mr. Holcomb offered a solution. As his wife, I'll have security, and his standing in the community is beyond reproach." "And what do you want, Rosalyn?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in so long. "What I want doesn't matter much now," she replied softly. "I gave my word." Quinn leaned forward slightly. "It matters to me." The intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, Rosalyn allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where choices were hers to make, where a man looked at her the way Quinn Pierce was looking at her now. The spell was broken by the arrival of the waitress with Quinn's breakfast. As they ate, their conversation turned to lighter topics: the history of Timber Creek, the beauty of the surrounding mountains, Quinn's small ranch just outside of town. "It's not much," he said of his property, "but it's good land with plenty of water. Started with just 20 acres after the war, and have been adding to it bit by bit. You fought in the war? She asked. He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. Cavalry. Saw more than I care to remember. My father, too, she said. He was never the same after. It was the closest she'd come to explaining her father's descent into gambling and drink that had eventually cost them everything. Quinn seemed to understand what she wasn't saying. War changes a man. Some find their way back, others don't. As they finished their meal, Quinn hesitated, then said, I'm heading to the general store to pick up some supplies. Would you care to join me? I could show you a bit of the town. Rosalyn knew she should decline. Bernard Holcomb was due to call on her that afternoon, and it wouldn't do to be seen walking about town with another man. But the thought of spending even a few more hours in Quinn's company was too tempting to resist. I would like that very much, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. The morning air was crisp as they stepped outside. Timber Creek was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors and townsfolk going about their business. Quinn offered his arm, and Rosalyn took it, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. Main Street's not much, but it has most of what folks need, Quinn explained as they walked. General store, blacksmith, saloon, though I don't recommend that for a lady post office, and, of course, Holcomb's Bank. He pointed to an imposing brick building that stood in stark contrast to the wooden structures surrounding it. Timber Creek Bank and Trust was emblazoned across the front in gold lettering. It's very substantial, Rosalyn commented, feeling a chill despite the warming day. Holcomb likes people to know he has money, Quinn said, his tone neutral. The bank holds most of the mortgages in the county, including mine. That surprised her. You do business with Mr. Holcomb? Not by choice. He bought the note from the previous lender last year. Raised the interest too. Rosalyn frowned. Can he do that? He's the banker. He can do pretty much what he pleases around here. Quinn's expression darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. But that's not your concern. Come on, let me introduce you to Mrs. Jenkins at the general store. She makes the best apple tarts west of the Mississippi. As they continued down the street, Rosalyn noticed the curious glances and whispers that followed them. Being the object of town gossip wasn't new to her, but she hated drawing Quinn into it. People are talking, she murmured. Quinn's mouth quirked up at one corner. Let them. Gives them something to do besides complain about the weather. His cavalier attitude made her laugh, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in too long. It felt good. The general store was a treasure trove of goods, from practical necessities to small luxuries. While Quinn collected his supplies, Rosalyn found herself drawn to a display of fabrics. Her fingers lingered on a bolt of deep green calico. That would suit you, Mrs. Jenkins said, appearing beside her. The older woman had a kind face and observant eyes. Brings out the gold in your eyes. It's lovely, Rosalyn agreed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. Perhaps another time. Mrs. Jenkins studied her for a moment. You're the Vance girl, aren't you? Come to marry Mr. Holcomb. Yes, madam. The shopkeeper's expression was unreadable. Well, you'll want some new things then. Mr. Holcomb can certainly afford it. I don't wish to presume, Rosalyn said carefully. Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice. Between us, dear, a woman should always have something that's just hers, even a married woman. She discreetly slipped a small packet into Rosalyn's hand. Lavender sachet, for your linens, no charge. Touched by the unexpected kindness, Rosalyn thanked her. As they were leaving, Quinn suddenly stopped at a display near the door. Wait here a moment, he said, then approached Mrs. Jenkins in hushed conversation. Money changed hands, and he returned with a small paper-wrapped package, which he handed to Rosalyn. What's this? She asked, surprised. A welcome gift, he said simply. Open it later. Outside, they walked more slowly, as if by mutual agreement, wanting to extend their time together. When they reached the hotel, Quinn hesitated. Rosalyn, he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. I hope you find happiness here in Timber Creek. The formality in his tone told her he was saying goodbye in more ways than one. Once she was Bernard Holcomb's wife, friendly walks with Quinn Pierce would be impossible. Thank you for your kindness, Quinn, she replied, meaning it more than he could know. It's made my arrival here much less daunting." He tipped his hat, his gray eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "That blue really is my favorite color," he said softly, then turned and walked away. In her room, Rosalyn unwrapped Quinn's gift with trembling fingers. Inside was a small jar of honey and a handkerchief embroidered with tiny blue flowers. Simple gifts, but somehow perfect. She pressed the handkerchief to her cheek, allowing herself one moment of weakness before reality reasserted itself. A knock at her door announced the arrival of a messenger boy. "Miss Vance, Mr. Holcomb sends his compliments and will call for you at 2 o'clock. Her future awaited, and it had nothing to do with kind cowboys or the color blue. Bernard Holcomb was exactly as Rosalyn had imagined, tall, thin, and meticulously groomed. His salt and pepper hair was combed precisely, and his suit was clearly expensive. At 52, he was not unattractive, but there was a coldness in his pale blue eyes that made Rosalyn shiver despite the warm afternoon. "Miss Vance," he greeted her, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a perfunctory kiss. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Holcomb," she replied, withdrawing her hand as soon as politeness allowed. "And thank you for arranging my accommodation." They sat in the hotel's small parlor, a proper distance apart on a floral settee. Holcomb studied her with an appraising gaze that reminded her uncomfortably of her father evaluating livestock. "I see you favor blue," he commented, glancing at her dress. "My late wife preferred burgundy. We shall have to acquire a new wardrobe for you after the wedding, something more befitting your position as my wife." Rosalyn forced a smile. "You're very generous." "I believe in appearances, Miss Vance. The banker's wife must reflect his standing in the community." His tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. "Speaking of which, I've arranged for the town's best seamstress to fit you for your wedding gown tomorrow. White, of course, though perhaps ivory would be more appropriate, given the circumstances." The implied criticism of her situation, a penniless woman marrying for security, was clear. Rosalyn felt her cheeks burn, but kept her expression neutral. "Whatever you think best, Mr. Holcomb." He nodded, satisfied with her compliance. "I've also taken the liberty of inviting the town's most prominent families to the ceremony. It will be a modest affair, but proper. Reverend Mills will officiate at the church, followed by a reception at my home." As he continued outlining his plans, Rosalyn found her attention wandering. From the hotel window, she could see a portion of Main Street, where people went about their business. A flash of familiar broad shoulders caught her eye. Quinn, loading supplies into a wagon. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward the hotel. Even at this distance, the connection between them was palpable. "Miss Vance?" Holcomb's sharp tone brought her attention back. "Am I boring you?" "Not at all," she assured him quickly. "I was just taking in the town. It seems quite prosperous." His expression softened marginally. "It is, and it will continue to be, under proper management. The railroad will reach us within 2 years, and when it does, Timber Creek will become the most important settlement in the county." "You sound very certain." "I am certain of everything I put my mind to, Miss Vance." His thin lips curved in what might have been meant as a smile. "Including my choice of wife." Their courtship lasted an uncomfortable hour, during which Holcomb did most of the talking. By the time he left, promising to send his carriage for her, fitting the next day, Rosalyn felt drained. She returned to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, fingering the handkerchief Quinn had given her. The contrast between her morning with the honest, straightforward cowboy and her afternoon with her calculated fiancé couldn't have been starker. But what choice did she have? Her father's gambling debts had left her destitute. Bernard Holcomb had paid those debts in exchange for her hand in marriage. It was a contract, plain and simple, and Rosalyn Vance honored her contracts, even if it meant giving up any chance of the kind of connection she'd felt, however briefly, with Quinn Pierce. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. True to his word, Holcomb had arranged everything down to the last detail. Rosalyn found herself shuffled from the seamstress to the minister, from the baker to the florist, rarely consulted but frequently instructed. The wedding dress was beautiful, she had to admit. Ivory silk with delicate lace trim, far finer than anything she'd ever owned. Standing for her final fitting, surrounded by pins and measuring tapes, Rosalyn caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. "You'll be the most elegant bride Timber Creek has ever seen," the seamstress declared, adjusting the train. Mr. Holcomb spared no expense. "It's lovely," Rosalyn agreed, though the tightness in her chest had nothing to do with the corseting. As she left the seamstress's shop, the afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky. Holcomb's driver was nowhere to be seen, likely delayed by some errand. Rather than wait, Rosalyn decided to walk back to the hotel. The fresh air might clear her head. She hadn't gone far when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Quinn riding toward her, leading a second horse laden with supplies. He reined in when he spotted her. "Miss Vance," he greeted her, tipping his hat. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Out for a walk?" "Just returning from a fitting," she explained, suddenly self-conscious. "Mr. Holcomb's driver seems to be delayed." Quinn glanced down the empty street. "Allow me to escort you back to the hotel. These roads can get rough when the mining crews come off shift." Before she could protest, he had dismounted and was walking beside her, leading both horses. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, comforting in its ease, unsettling in how much she welcomed it. "How are the wedding preparations coming along?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Efficiently," she replied with a small smile. "Mr. Holcomb is very organized." Quinn nodded. "That he is." After a pause, he added, "And are you content with the arrangements?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Rosalyn knew she should affirm her satisfaction, maintain the polite fiction that this was a love match rather than a business transaction. But standing beside Quinn in the golden afternoon light, she found she couldn't lie. "I'm grateful for the security Mr. Holcomb offers," she said carefully. "Not many women in my position would be so fortunate." Quinn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's not what I asked." Their eyes met. And for a moment, all pretense fell away. "No," she admitted softly, "but it's the best answer I can give." They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the creak of leather from the horse's tack and the distant calls of workers changing shifts at the mine. "I'll be leaving town after the harvest is in," Quinn said abruptly. "Taking a herd north to Wyoming, might be gone through winter." The news shouldn't have affected her as it did. "I see, a long journey. Necessary. Cattle prices are better up north, and I need the money to make my mortgage payment to your future husband." There was no bitterness in his tone, just simple fact. "Thought you should know?" What he wasn't saying was clear. After Saturday, their paths wouldn't cross again. It was for the best, she told herself. These feelings, whatever they were, could only lead to trouble. "I wish you safe travels," she said formally. They had reached the hotel. Quinn handed his horse's reins to a stable boy, then turned to Rosalyn. "May I call on you tomorrow, one last time before the wedding? There's something I'd like to show you." Prudence dictated she refuse. Bernard Holcomb would certainly not approve of her spending time alone with another man, especially one as handsome and unmarried as Quinn Pierce. But the wedding was only 2 days away, and after that, her life would no longer be her own. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." His smile was worth whatever risk she was taking. "I'll come by at noon. Wear something suitable for riding." Before she could respond, a voice called her name. Bernard Holcomb was approaching from the direction of the bank, his expression darkening as he took in the scene before him. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice clipped, "I see you've found alternative transportation." "Mr. Pierce was kind enough to escort me when your driver didn't appear," Rosalyn explained. Holcomb's gaze shifted to Quinn. "How neighborly of you, Pierce, though I'm sure a man in your position has more pressing matters to attend to than playing escort." "Never too busy to help a lady in need," Quinn replied easily, though Rosalyn noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Good day, Mr. Holcomb, Miss Vance." With a tip of his hat, he collected his horses and continued down the street. Holcomb watched him go, then turned back to Rosalyn. "I would prefer you not to associate with men like Pierce, my dear. He may own some land, but he's little more than a drifter with delusions of becoming a cattle baron, not the sort of company my wife should keep." His possessiveness, though not unexpected, rankled. "I understood him to be a respected rancher in the community." "He's tolerated," not respected, Holcomb corrected. And he's behind on his mortgage payments. Another 6 months, and that ranch of his will likely be mine. He offered his arm. Shall we? I thought we might discuss the wedding dinner menu over supper. As she took his arm, Rosalyn cast one last glance down the street where Quinn had disappeared. Whatever he wanted to show her tomorrow, she realized she wanted very much to see it, even if it was just one final memory to carry with her into her new life. The next day dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn day that made the mountains seem close enough to touch. Rosalyn, dressed in her one riding skirt, faded but serviceable, and the blue blouse that had become something of a talisman, she left a note for Bernard, claiming a headache and the need for rest before the wedding, then slipped out the hotel's side entrance to meet Quinn. He was waiting with 2 horses, his own sturdy bay, and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. Did you think I wouldn't? Thought Holcomb might have objections. What Mr. Holcomb doesn't know won't trouble him, she replied with more boldness than she felt. Where are we going? Quinn's smile was infectious. It's a surprise. Can you still ride? Your father mentioned you were quite accomplished. You spoke with my father? This was news to her. Quinn helped her mount before responding. Once, in St. Louis, he was in a difficult situation at a card table. I helped him out. Understanding dawned. You were the one who paid his debt that night. Her father had mentioned a stranger's kindness, though he'd been too drunk to recall the man's name. Quinn shrugged, swinging into his own saddle. It wasn't much, just enough to get him home safely. But it had been more than that, Rosalyn knew. That particular night had been the beginning of her father's final decline, the night he'd first approached Bernard Holcomb about using his daughter to settle his mounting debts. They rode out of town, following a narrow trail that wound through ponderosa pines and aspen groves, beginning to turn gold with the season. The familiar rhythm of horseback riding came back to Rosalyn quickly, and she found herself enjoying the freedom of movement after days confined to the hotel and shops. You ride well, Quinn observed as they navigated a rocky stretch. Most city ladies I've met can barely stay in the saddle. I'm not a city lady, she reminded him. I grew up on a farm in Missouri before my father sold it. Horses were my first friends. He nodded as if this confirmed something for him. I thought as much. You have capable hands. It was such a simple observation, yet it touched her deeply. Bernard Holcomb had complimented her appearance, her manners, even her posture, but never her capability. After about an hour's ride, the trail began to climb more steeply. Just as Rosalyn was beginning to wonder how much further they had to go, they crested a ridge and the valley opened up before them in breathtaking splendor. Oh, she breathed, reining in her horse. Below them stretched a perfect valley, bisected by a clear stream that glinted in the sunlight. A small cabin stood near the water, smoke curling from its chimney, and beyond it, a meadow where cattle grazed peacefully. This is what I wanted to show you, Quinn said, his voice soft with pride. My place. It's beautiful, she said honestly. So peaceful. It's not much compared to Holcomb's mansion, but every board in that cabin I cut and placed myself. Every acre of that pasture I cleared by hand. The love he had for this land was evident in every word. Rosalyn felt a pang of envy for the simple clarity of his attachment to this place. They rode down into the valley, where Quinn showed her around his modest ranch. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture he'd mostly made himself. A vegetable garden thrived near the stream, and an apple orchard was just beginning to bear fruit. You've done all this alone? She asked as they walked through the orchard. Emmett helps. He's my ranch hand. Lives in the bunkhouse when he's not in town spending his wages. Quinn picked an apple and polished it on his sleeve before offering it to her. First harvest. They're small but sweet. Rosalyn bit into the apple, savoring its crisp tartness. Perfect, she declared. They ended up sitting by the stream, watching the play of sunlight on water. Quinn had packed a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and more apples, which they shared in comfortable silence. Why did you bring me here, Quinn? Rosalyn finally asked the question that had been on her mind all day. He looked at her directly, no pretense in his gray eyes. Because I wanted you to see what could be before you decide what will be. Her heart quickened. What are you saying? I'm saying you have a choice, Rosalyn. Whatever promises your father made, whatever arrangement Holcomb thinks he's bought, you still have a choice. You don't understand, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The debts can be repaid in other ways, Quinn finished. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm not poor either. My last cattle drive brought enough to pay off what your father owed. Rosalyn stared at him, disbelief warring with hope. Why would you do that? Because from the moment I saw you step down from that stagecoach, holding your head high despite those vultures laughing at your dress, I knew you were the strongest woman I'd ever met. His voice was rough with emotion, and I knew I wanted the chance to know you better. You barely know me, she protested weakly. I know enough. He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I know you're kind and resilient. I know you love horses and the taste of fresh apples. I know your laugh is the sweetest sound I've heard in years. Tears pricked at her eyes. Quinn, I'm not asking for promises, he said quickly. Just a chance. Don't marry Holcomb tomorrow. Give yourself time to decide what you really want. The enormity of what he was suggesting left her breathless. To break her engagement on the eve of the wedding would create a scandal that would follow her forever. And yet, sitting here in this peaceful valley with Quinn, the prospect of scandal seemed a small price to pay for the chance at genuine happiness. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, he assured her, and you wouldn't be alone. Whatever you decide, even if it's not me, I'll help you. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, reminding them that their stolen day was coming to an end. With reluctance, they mounted their horses for the ride back to town. As they approached Timber Creek, Rosalyn's turmoil intensified. By tomorrow, she would either be Bernard Holcomb's wife or... What? A scandalous woman who jilted a respectable man at the altar? Or perhaps something she'd never allowed herself to imagine, a woman free to choose her own path. Think about it, Quinn said as they reached the edge of town. That's all I ask. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. As they parted ways at the hotel's rear entrance, Quinn pressed something into her hand, a small blue flower, its petals the exact shade of her dress. My favorite color, he reminded her softly, then rode away. Rosalyn slipped back into her room unnoticed, the flower clutched in her hand and her heart beating a chaotic rhythm in her chest. On her bed lay her wedding dress, carefully laid out for tomorrow morning. Beside it, a note from Bernard Holcomb, confirming the arrangements and reminding her of his expectations for prompt timing. She sat by the window as darkness fell over Timber Creek, the small blue flower in her palm, a silent question she had until morning to answer. Dawn broke over Timber Creek with the promise of a perfect autumn day for a wedding. Rosalyn had barely slept, her mind churning with indecision until the first light crept through her window. Now, as she stood in her hotel room, surrounded by the trappings of a bride, the ivory dress, the satin shoes, the small bouquet of roses, she felt strangely calm. The choice, when it came down to it, wasn't really a choice at all. She knew what she had to do. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Peterson and two other ladies from town, sent by Bernard to help her prepare. Rosalyn took a deep breath and opened the door. "Good morning, ladies," she said, with a composure that surprised even her. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." The church bells of Timber Creek rang out at precisely 11 o'clock, summoning the town's residents to witness the wedding of Bernard Holcomb and Rosalyn Vance. The pews were filled with curious onlookers and the town's elite, all eager to see the banker's new bride. At the altar, Bernard Holcomb checked his pocket watch for the third time, his expression growing increasingly tight. Whispers began to circulate among the guests as the minutes ticked by with no sign of the bride. Just as the murmurs threatened to become a buzz of speculation, the church doors opened. A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Rosalyn Vance stood in the doorway, but not in the ivory silk wedding gown Holcomb had commissioned. Instead, she wore her old blue dress, the one that had caused such derision upon her arrival in town. Her hair was simply arranged, adorned only with a small blue flower tucked behind one ear. With steady steps, she walked down the aisle, not toward the altar, but directly to where Bernard Holcomb stood. The banker's face had gone from impatient to thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" he hissed. "Where is your gown?" "Mr. Holcomb," Rosalyn said, her voice clear enough to carry to the front pews. "I came to tell you in person that I cannot marry you today." The church erupted in shocked whispers. Holcomb's face flushed a dangerous red. "This is absurd. We have an arrangement." "An arrangement my father made without my consent," she corrected gently but firmly. "I am grateful for your generosity in settling his debts, but I cannot repay that debt with my life." "You'll be ruined," he warned, his voice low and threatening. "No one will have you after this disgrace." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But I would rather face uncertainty on my own terms than security on someone else's." She turned to address the stunned congregation. "I apologize to all of you who came today expecting a wedding. Your time has been wasted, and for that, I am truly sorry." With that, she placed a small velvet pouch in Holcomb's hand, containing the jewelry he had given her, and walked back down the aisle, her head held high despite the whispers and stares that followed her. Outside the church, the bright autumn sunlight seemed to welcome her. Rosalyn took a deep breath of freedom, then nearly stumbled when she saw Quinn Pierce leaning against a hitching post, his bay horse saddled and ready beside him. He was dressed in his best shirt and vest, a small blue flower matching hers pinned to his lapel. "You didn't go through with it," he said, wonder in his voice. "No," she confirmed, "I couldn't." His smile was slow and warm. "And now? Now I need to find work," she said practically. "And lodging, since I can hardly stay at the hotel Holcomb arranged." "I might know of a place," Quinn said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Small cabin, needs a woman's touch. Owner's looking for someone who knows horses and doesn't mind hard work." "Is that so?" she replied, unable to keep the smile from her lips. "And what would the terms of such an arrangement be?" "Strictly honorable," he assured her, suddenly serious. "Separate quarters until you're ready for more, if you ever are. No pressure, no expectations beyond honest work and honest dealings." "And if I were eventually interested in renegotiating those terms?" Quinn's gaze softened. "Then the lady would set the pace. The owner's patient. He's willing to wait as long as it takes." From the church behind them came the sound of raised voices as the wedding guests began to emerge. Soon the town would be alive with gossip about the bride who jilted Bernard Holcomb at the altar. "We should go," Quinn said, glancing over her shoulder. "Unless you've changed your mind." Rosalyn looked back at the church, at the life of security and status she was rejecting, then at Quinn with his honest eyes and patient smile. "No," she said firmly, "no more changing my mind." He helped her mount the chestnut mare, the same one they'd ridden yesterday, which was saddled and waiting beside his bay. As they rode out of town, past the curious stares and whispers, Rosalyn felt lighter than she had in years. "That blue really is my favorite color, you know," Quinn said, as they crested the hill that would take them to his valley. "Has been since the day you arrived." Rosalyn laughed, the sound carrying on the clear mountain air. "I'm beginning to think it might be mine, too." The seasons changed, and with them, Rosalyn's life transformed. Autumn faded into a winter of snowbound evenings by the fire, where Quinn taught her to play chess, and she read aloud from the small collection of books he'd accumulated over the years. True to his word, he kept his distance physically, occupying the cabin while she took the more comfortable bunkhouse, which they had improved with curtains and a larger stove. The scandal of her broken engagement gradually faded, replaced by new gossip when Bernard Holcomb left town. Suddenly, after several of his banking practices came under scrutiny, rumors suggested he had been charging exorbitant interest rates and foreclosing on properties without proper cause. By spring, a new banker had taken over, and the mortgages Quinn and others had struggled with were renegotiated on fairer terms. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pasture. Seedlings in the garden, and a deepening bond between Rosalyn and Quinn. They worked side by side, her knowledge of farming complementing his ranching skills. She discovered a talent for breeding horses, starting with just 2 mares Quinn purchased specifically for her to train. It was a warm evening in late spring, when Rosalyn found Quinn sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into what looked like a small horse. "Supper's ready," she called, but instead of coming inside, he patted the space beside him on the step. "Sit with me a minute?" he asked. She joined him, enjoying the peaceful sounds of the valley at dusk. "What are you making?" "Just practicing," he said, setting the carving aside. "Rosalyn, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. After months of friendship and growing affection, always with the careful distance he had promised, she had begun to wonder if he'd changed his mind about wanting more. "Yes," she encouraged when he hesitated. "These past months having you here, it's been the happiest time of my life," he began, his usually confident voice uncertain. "I know we agreed to keep things simple, but I find myself hoping for more." "I've been hoping too," she admitted softly. His eyes lit up. "Really?" She nodded, suddenly shy, despite the months of growing closeness between them. "I've been waiting for you to say something." "I didn't want to rush you," he explained. "After everything with Holcomb, I wanted to be sure you had time to know your own mind." "I know my mind quite well, Quinn Pierce," she said, finding her courage, "and my heart too." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Rosalyn Vance, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because of any arrangement or obligation, but because if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you've made me." Joy bubbled up inside her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, I will." His smile was radiant as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but solid." "It's perfect," she assured him as he slipped it onto her finger. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate as months of restrained longing finally found expression. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I saw you in that blue dress," he confessed. Rosalyn laughed, joy making her lightheaded. "I still have it, you know. That old blue dress everyone laughed at." "I hope you keep it forever," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It led me to you." They were married 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony by the stream, with only Emmett Taylor and Mrs. Jenkins from the general store as witnesses. Rosalyn wore a new dress of deep blue calico that Mrs. Jenkins had helped her make, with a crown of wildflowers in her hair. Quinn wore his best shirt and a new vest, looking at her as if she were the most beautiful sight he'd ever beheld. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love and partnership that needed no elaborate language to express their depth. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering cheered, and Quinn swept Rosalyn into a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. A feast prepared by Mrs. Jenkins, music provided by Emmett's surprisingly skilled fiddle playing and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. As the evening wound down, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in the glow of lantern light. "Mrs. Pierce," Quinn said, testing the name as they stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. "How does it sound?" "Like the beginning of our story," Rosalyn replied, leaning into his embrace. Over the years that followed, their small ranch flourished into one of the most prosperous in the county. Quinn's cattle operation expanded, but it was Rosalyn's horse breeding program that brought them particular renown. Her keen eye for good bloodlines and gentle training methods produced mounts sought after throughout the territory. They added on to the cabin, built a proper stable, and established a reputation for fair dealing that stood in stark contrast to the memory of Bernard Holcomb's predatory practices. When the railroad finally reached Timber Creek in 1880, Quinn and Rosalyn were among the first to benefit, their livestock finding markets as far east as Chicago. Their greatest joy came with the birth of their daughter, Eleanor, in the spring of 1881, followed 2 years later by their son, Daniel. The children grew up strong and capable, raised among horses and open spaces, taught the value of hard work and honest dealings by parents whose love for each other only deepened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Rosalyn with a special gift, a shadow box containing her old blue dress, carefully preserved with the dried remains of the small blue flower he had given her on that pivotal day. "To remember how it all began," he said, as she traced the faded fabric with trembling fingers. "As if I could ever forget," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It was the best decision I ever made, walking out of that church." "Walking toward me," he corrected gently, pressing a kiss to her temple. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple. Their children playing nearby, Rosalyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a desperate young woman in a faded dress to a confident rancher's wife with a thriving business of her own. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "How differently things might have turned out," she admitted, "if you hadn't been there that day, standing up for a stranger in an old blue dress." "Best thing I ever did," he said, with the certainty of a man who had never regretted his choice. "Telling those gossips that blue was my favorite color." "Was it really?" she asked, realizing she'd never questioned that detail of their first meeting. "Your favorite color, I mean." Quinn's laugh was warm in the gathering dusk. "It is now," he said, drawing her closer. "It has been since the moment I saw you wearing it." In the years that followed, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, the story of the bride in the blue dress and the cowboy who claimed it was his favorite color became something of a legend in Timber Creek. Younger generations smiled at the romance of it, not fully understanding the courage it had taken for a penniless young woman to choose an uncertain future with a man of modest means over the security of a loveless marriage to a wealthy banker. But Rosalyn and Quinn knew. Every anniversary they would take out the preserved blue dress and remember not just the beginning of their story, but all the chapters they had written together since, the struggles and triumphs, the laughter and tears, the quiet moments and grand adventures that had filled their life together. And whenever anyone asked the secret to their enduring happiness, Quinn would wink at his wife and say simply, "I married a woman brave enough to wear blue to her own wedding." To which Rosalyn would always reply, with the smile that still made his heart skip a beat after all these years, "And I married a man wise enough to say it was his favorite color."